Welcome back, boss bitches. Today, I am so excited to welcome on Alyssa. She is one of my dear friends. She used to live here in San Diego, and we got connected initially through an energy healing session, but we've become fast friends and even business associates since. And I'm just very excited to have her on our episode today talking about Astro Geology. And I will let her take it away and explain all the things because there's a lot that goes into it that's kind of confusing for me. So, Alyssa, thank you so much for being here with us. If you'd like to share a little about yourself.
Thank you for having me and thinking of me to come on and collaborate. So, my name's Alyssa. I do mainly astrogeography, or some people call it astrocartography. They're one and the same. I do one-on-one sessions or couple sessions, which is kind of like my version of life guidance. And so I use tools from astrology and astrogeography to basically help a very, very wide range of people in different, situations and where they are in their life. So astrogeography is the astrology of place. And for those listening, you probably have seen this chart. It is a blue chart and it has a bunch of different colorful lines and no one knows what the heck is going on. That's the number one feedback I always get, is that this chart is too confusing, which it kind of does look crazy, but it is such an amazing tool that I've just found to support myself and to support where we live and where we call home, or maybe where we want to call home. And so, yeah, post 2020, a lot of people were shifting their relationship with home. And this was just something that I had in my toolkit that I decided to start sharing with other people. And it kind of spiraled out of control from there. So I've been working full time for myself online for at least the last 5 years. And I've started doing only astrology in 2021. So it's my first year concluding business. And it's been so transformative and so amazing. And I've just got to connect with the most amazing clients possible. And so many amazing moves happen, babies coming to life, all the fun, amazing things that kind of happen within the realm of the stars. So
Yeah,
that's kind of a brief there.
Yeah, I had my first reading with Alyssa done in 2020, and I really had no idea what she did, but I knew a couple people that had gone to her for astrogeography charts and chart readings. And having my chart read again, it was confusing. I saw all these lines and I had no idea what any of them meant, but she really broke it down and explained kind of what each line meant. More important lines being like where you were born and where you're currently living. But also, it was surprising to see some areas on a map that I've traveled to or even haven't traveled to, but I just have like this burning desire to be there. And some of these places I've traveled to multiple times, and it's interesting to see what particular lines mean on the map. And then other lines that I have this burning desire to go to that I've never been to, but it's like that pull or that calling that you have to certain areas across the world. So having a chart, your chart specifically read for you, can be an eye-opening experience to see how aligned or unaligned you are with certain areas that you're choosing to put yourself in, and areas across the whole world. So Alyssa actually pulled up my chart that she read for me last year, and we were kind of reviewing that before we started recording this episode. And yeah, I was just sharing with her some things that I see maybe in my future, and having that reconfirmation that those might be areas that I would be really thriving in if I actually moved there.
And we have kind of these limitless possibilities within our chart. We have the opportunity to experience all of the energies, all of the planetary bodies, or none of them. Like there's people who are born in their hometown and never leave, and that's their life experience. So it's really like, I like to call them invitations. Like they're invitations, and we get to choose to accept them and experience them, or to decline them and be like, maybe I want something else. So it's so unique to everyone. And yeah, each chart is vastly different.
I actually love that you said that it is more of an invitation, because really that's all life is, right? Like we're constantly getting these little nudges throughout life, of maybe what next move to make or connection to keep or get rid of in our life, what forward steps to possibly pursue. And having a chart read just kind of opens up maybe more possibilities, or brings awareness to things that you might not have really considered prior. And now that it just plants the seed and creates that invitation. I love that. It's beautiful.
And that's also, the same with our natal birth chart. Like when we're looking at our astrological like natal chart, which is what most people are like comfortable working with, or like at least understand their sun sign, that's also an invitation for us to experience those planetary energies, because the way that we kind of go through and navigate life are going to make those a little bit more variable as we age. And so we're kind of choosing, like, this is how this energy can show up, and it might show up, but it doesn't necessarily have to that way. And yeah, there's just so many different energetic frequencies regardless of the stars, just within our earth grid. And then we kind of have this also connection to the higher realms that really kind of, ring true for pretty much everyone I've had a session with. So
That's beautiful. So what I find really interesting about Alyssa specifically is that she has divorced the moon, and those are her words. And she's basically, as an astro geographer, studying the planets and different alignments in particular people's lives, and how we are actually influenced by these floating rocks in the sky. But so many people, especially in the spiritual community, put such emphasis on almost allowing certain planets to control them, instead of having the invitation or still the freedom of choice within possibilities. And I definitely want to hear more about your journey with going through that, because I think this would resonate with a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, so I actually just did on Saturday, we did a moon matrix masterclass. So I did 2 hours of teaching all around the moon, which was amazing because I got to really reflect on my experience of where did I find a lot of the rituals that I practice, and like where do they translate from? Who are they coming from? Are they like a trustworthy, source? And so I just really had to go into a process, my own process of discernment when doing practices. And so I'll give you the very short version, but essentially I was in a romantic partnership a couple years ago with someone who I can only like really relate to like an Osho complex, like was very high up in the spiritual community, was very manipulative. And we used to host moon workshops together. So every month we would host kind of like a gathering and have people come, and we do like manifestation work, or like, reading tarot, all these different amazing tools. But that was like, a person who I watched manipulate others via the moon matrix, or like the moon, because they were using people as a tool to kind of get what they wanted. And I was like, wait, that doesn't feel right. And then a couple of years ago, actually, when I was living in San Diego, I had another situation happen where this woman approached us on the beach, and she essentially asked if we were doing like a blood ceremony, because we were gathered under the full moon, and I guess she was looking for the one that was happening. So those were two really big eye-opening experiences for me to look at. Not only are we going through, yes, powerful planetary shifts and lunar cycles, but also we're doing a lot of the rituals and practice in tandem with a lot of the like darker magic that exists in the world. And to me, it didn't really feel right to continue opening up like my very sacred energy when I now consciously understand that there are a lot of bad people out there who are doing really manipulative practices. And so that is kind of like the darker side of it. The more astrological side of it is that the moon acts as a satellite between the sun and the earth. The moon doesn't have a frequency of her own. She doesn't carry this like divine feminine archetype that a lot of people like associate her with. It really is like the dark mother. Like we have to just kind of reframe that within our own minds, because if the earth is a mother, right, provides everything that we need to survive, provides life and can sustain life, then how is the moon also the mother? So that was like a question I kept toying with, of like, how can there be two mothers? Like, there cannot be. And there's actually a lot of historical text within so many different native traditions across the world, of like people in Fiji, people in like the Zulu tribe. They all reference this time before the moon. So there is this historical context that there was a time before the moon, which New Age theory is that, you know, the moon or the earth got struck and the moon fell off, and now it's just, you know, interplaying in our relationship in space. Which there's so many different theories. Like, there's like a hollow moon theory, or that the moon's a satellite. There's so many different crazy like conspiracies out there. So definitely use your own discernment when I'm speaking about this, and, you know, just take what resonates for you. But this was a post I did at the beginning of the year that just kind of changed the trajectory of my own personal work, because I kind of just had it. I was really fed up with New Age teachers, you know, looping these patterns of like feeling really comfortable every month. There is a lunar cycle happening, so I can rely upon this to, you know, have it as an offering, or like bring it into my space. And I just really had to go through and see, like, who taught me these things? Who told me to, you know, like put my crystals out? Who told me to do a burning ceremony during the full moon? Where did this come from? And when I, excuse me, looked at the root of all of that, it was really in disconnection with my physical body. Like, none of that felt really good to me. So I kind of just stepped away and took a really long pause on all of the moon things, and just started doing my own personal research. And so that's a part of my own discernment practice as well, of like really researching and understanding and knowing that I might sound crazy, but it has a little bit of validity to it.
Yeah, I feel like, you know, especially being in the spiritual community, there is such an emphasis on the moon. And I find that a lot of people, whether you're in a spiritual community or religion or political affiliation, a lot of people just kind of like follow the herd instead of making the decision for themselves, or feel pressured that they have to be doing something a certain way in order for it to be right. And the whole time it's completely out of alignment for their personal alignments or philosophies. And that's where they're finding a lot of like blockages in manifestation, or creating deeper connections with other people or within themselves. I mean, there's so much other things that can come along with it, but you know, with all of this, it's compelling to find what is for you, find what is aligned for you. And if you're in a community that you feel you have to be doing something a certain way, or you feel pressured to participate in things that maybe just don't feel quite right, then today is your invitation to step away and find what is more aligned, or what is right for you. And sometimes it's going to be the unconventional approach to things, or just kind of your take on the practice or the ritual that you've been taught, and that might not be wholly in alignment with you, but partially it is, and you can find your own adaptation. And that's where I find, like with the moon for myself too, I felt, you know, as I was getting deeper into my own spirituality, I needed to be practicing these moon rituals. And I felt whenever I would talk about it, people maybe higher up in the spiritual community are like, oh, you cannot do releasing unless you're doing that at the new moon. And you can't, right? Or like, you can't do certain practices unless you're doing it at this time of the moon cycle. And sometimes it felt kind of opposite for me. We're like, actually, for whatever reason, I feel a more powerful release or more powerful alignment created when I do something in the middle of a cycle or on the opposite end. And that's kind of where I started looking in a deeper reflection of like, why am I doing things so rigidly in a practice that's actually supposed to be open and free flowing?
Right.
And, you know, that's kind of when I found out that you did these types of chart readings, and this was so different from anything that I've ever really experienced before. But it is very complex as well, but you are so knowledgeable. And I definitely want to kind of take a deeper look at what somebody can expect within a astrogeography session.
Yeah. And what's really interesting about your chart is that you were born in relationship to a moon line. So there is a moon representation within your astrogeography chart. And a lot of traditional astrologers just teach this as like the feminine, or like understanding the feminine. And I don't like putting that verbiage on there because it's very, our idea of the feminine has been very distorted by what reality tells, or like what, you know, society tells us it is at this moment in time. And so I, you know, view the moon really as like that shadow aspect of like understanding the shadow and why and where it came from, and doing that deep healing work. And the other way I kind of describe the moon is like a washing machine effect, where we're always somewhere within the cycle of the washing machine, right? But we're never really like, you know, centered or feel complete, because we're always somewhere in the cycle. So actually within your chart, that is one of two of the closest energies that you were born on. So doing a lot of shadow work, looking at your own shadows, you know, doing this with your clients, this definitely goes tandem together of just what you're here to understand and what you're here to kind of make sense of in the world. And then the other line that you were born in close proximity to is your Mars line. So your Mars is ascending, and for Mars, it's really interesting, like the way that astrologers teach. And I just also want to like say this as a, you know, warning, or like something to reference, is that we're taking these super ancient texts from, you know, a really long time ago, and we're putting a contemporary approach on them. So when they were transcribing these planetary energies, like astrologers, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago, they had nothing to really hold the information, right? There was no pen and paper, you can't just write it down. So they kind of had to give the like extremist version of every single planet so that we can kind of like comprehend. And within that, there kind of lies these accepting planets, we can say, and more challenging planets. So for your second line of where you're born, it's actually a Mars line. And many astrologers will teach it like, oh, it's war, it's bloody. Like that's what Mars represents astrologically, yes. And also it represents, you know, energetic stamina and our ability to move forward and go through hard situations. And I think the way that a lot of astrology is interpreted now is so masculine, like because it was males who were, you know, transcribing this information from the stars. So, you know, to think of Mars as like war and like bloodshed, you know, I would never say that to a client, but that's kind of like what everyone's interpretation is of this planet. So those are the two closest energies you're born in proximity to. And that kind of just shows me where the work lies, or like where we have to understand these two energies within ourselves. So doing the shadow work and understanding your own energetic stamina of like how you go through life and how you push forward and how you get through difficult situations, those are kind of more represented by your like moon and your Mars line of where you were born. And then from there, you get to kind of decide, you know, what do you want to look at? Do you want to look at living somewhere different, or are you calling in partnership, or you do want to write a book? So each person's journey is so different. For you, I know specifically, obviously you moved across the country at some point, and you moved around a lot as a kid, right?
Yeah.
So you've gone through a lot of these energies already.
Yeah. Yeah, it was mostly like East Coast, and then I lived in Dallas for a short period of time, so I was definitely closer to like that purple line here on the chart. What line was that? I think you said Mercury.
Neptune. So
Neptune.
Neptune rules, yeah, the spiritual world, the kind of like underworld, you know. When I see Neptune, I always like just see it, you know, when you like stand at the ocean and it kind of like lures you into this like mermaid palace. That's like kind of Neptune energy. But the thing with Neptune is that it's so watery and it's so flowy that it doesn't have boundaries. So there's like that, you know, accepting aspect of Neptune, which is that it's very like underworld, kind of like dark, mysterious, fluid. And then there's the not accepting side, is that you will have no boundaries and people will walk all over you and you'll probably be like an emotional wreck.
That's actually very interesting that you say that. So like at the time, my dad was in the Navy when I was really young. And then we moved across the country. My dad retired here in San Diego and then got a job with American Airlines. So he was working in Dallas, Texas. But my mom bought a business here in San Diego. So we literally lived between Dallas and San Diego. And my parents are still married. They've always been married, but we tried to make that dynamic work, I think, for like 4 years.
Wow.
I went to school in San Diego, but basically every weekend or every other week, I would try to go visit my dad when he had time off. And it was just, there was no balance, no sense of stability, no boundaries, basically. What it felt like, it was just like I'm in limbo, like what is going on? And I actually ended up writing a book. I was like probably in fifth grade or sixth grade, maybe. And I wrote a book for like the student authors, whatever. And I got up in front of the whole school and I read this book about aliens coming down to Earth and like granting wishes. It was, I was young. And one of my wishes was for a new dad. But in the book, and my intention there was to be my dad coming home and being my new dad. But it got lost in translation there. And my mom gave my dad this book and we had like a family meeting, and he ended up quitting his job like 2 days later. And then that was kind of up in the air as well, because he had this great job as a pilot for a huge corporation, and now he was jobless, and we were trying to figure out like what's next. Do we have to sell the home here? So that part of my life, going back and forth and kind of like sometimes being stuck in Dallas, there was just no boundaries. And so anyways, long story short, it's basically so aligned how some of this stuff is. It's very eye-opening sometimes to go back in your past and see where you were living in certain areas and maybe what theme was playing out.
And that's really what, like, each of these is like a theme or an archetype that we're getting to experience, or is kind of like dancing alongside of us, of like just what's coming up in your life, what is showing face right now. And yeah, the interesting part about us talking prior to this of wanting to move closer back to that line is that now you're more equipped with the information and have done a lot of the work that you were set out to do. So now when you go back to this line, you're going to be a very different person than when you were a child. And I think that's something that people don't really take into consideration when looking at charts like this, of like if you had a bad experience there when you were like 10, and now you're 40, it's gonna be very different if you go back and experience that energy again.
Yeah, I almost moved there in 2016 back to Dallas, and Dallas is one of my favorite cities. I absolutely love it. If it wasn't so flat, I would like be all on board with moving back to that part of Texas.
Very flat.
Yeah, I need some mountains in my life.
So the other thing that we were talking about is like, where you are now, which is over in San Diego, is very different than where you were born. And also, the energy we just kind of talked about, where this is now your Venus and Sun line. So looking at, love and relationship, and the sun kind of acts as like an amplifier to other things within your astrogeography chart. So it's kind of amplifying love and relationship and partnership and community and nourishing and like indulging ourselves. So those are two, pretty good lines to be working on if I were to just, read your chart for you.
So the sun line and the Neptune line?
And Venus.
Venus, yeah. So that's the darker green, right? The Venus line?
Yeah.
And that's also interesting too, because I feel that a lot of lessons have been learned for me between these two lines. I lived in Vegas for 2 years, and just so much life lessons to be learned. So much healing and transition has happened for me in these two specific lines. And like you said, it has been an amplifier. So I feel like for a long time, it was amplifying the old wounds and the old patterns that needed to be healed. And now I'm finally starting to transition into creating more aligned connections and attracting more aligned partnerships into my life. And I feel like that's definitely been like a theme for me the past year of what has been highlighted and like you said, amplified. So I think it's just so cool to see how this stuff works. And again, the themes that are playing out along these lines, how interesting that is.
And sometimes I see the sun that way too, of like going in and taking, inventory of what we haven't really transmuted or worked through. And this comes up in a lot of people, that I just read for. And I am now starting to see it as like kind of like a flashlight, like investigating the inner world of like, okay, well, what's left in here? Like, where are you trying to hide? And it is that light force that gets to come in and kind of transmute and work with and push through and, just make a story that was maybe once hard. It's writing a new story for yourself. So once we do that work, then we get to really like reap the rewards of it. And you get to be they call this like the line of the celebrity. So you get to kind of like be seen, and people will now see you for who that healed version of yourself is, not kind of like that old version of self.
Yeah, I would definitely say that to be true as well. Like, I mean, all of these lines as a whole are invitations for you to go into deeper reflection. And each of them has a meaning, and each of them is significant in meaning to you as the individual. So again, it's like not here to have power over you or dictate what's going to happen, because we still have that free will. But
Right.
don't fall victim to the continual pattern. And if you don't like the line meaning, right, rewrite the narrative, or going into deeper reflection of how you can take responsibility for healing and changing what happens next.
100%. Yeah, we have the free will to navigate through these. And when someone's having a hard time or is going through a harder period in life, yes, your astrology can play into that, but it's also having the free will to look at it and be like, well, I get to change this story, and I get to say how these planets want to show up, or how I rewrite this for myself. So different for everyone. Everyone's so different, which is so beautiful, which makes this like cosmic dance even more amazing.
But something a point that I wanted to make here is like something that if you're not familiar with like the astrology world, something that you might hear a lot is Mercury's in retrograde, and like it's like beware time in just different patterns in our cycles, phases in astrology. And I've definitely, like, this last Mercury retrograde we had, the whole time I was like, don't feed into it. We're good. Everything's fine. But it was like one of the most intense Mercury retrogrades I've ever had. With that being said, where attention goes, energy flows. So if you're constantly thinking like, oh, Mercury's in retrograde, bad things are going to happen, then you're going to start perpetuating more bad things or attracting more bad things into your life. So it's like, take everything here with a grain of salt and with some grace. Like, know that you do have the free will to kind of move through your chart and through planetary alignments how you choose, and your reactions are your choice. The next step that you make, the decisions that you make, are yours to make. No planet is fully controlling the outcomes of life.
Right, 100%. Mercury retrograde always gets a bad reputation, but retrograde periods just happen for us to slow down and evaluate. That's all that time is. It's like an evaluation of like, okay, maybe this isn't working for me. Maybe this isn't working for my energy. Maybe I do need to do things differently. And I don't know where this like horrible reputation of Mercury retrograde came from, which, don't get me wrong, I've had my plenty of situations that have happened during retrograde that are very stereotypical, but also it's just like, we can't blame the planets for this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like this last one, I was in a car accident. I broke my laptop. One of my employees just randomly was like, yeah, I have personal stuff I have to, and she gave me like 1 day's notice. I was like, wait, in the middle of a project too, like what? And a bunch of other personal things kind of happened in this condensed 3-week period of time. And so like by week 2, when things were just like accumulating, I'm like, wait a minute, it is Mercury in retrograde. Like, I was trying to deny it this whole time. So sometimes there are patterns and themes, and kind of understanding that this too shall pass, right? And not feeding into an emotional response when we are going through those ebbs and flows in life.
100%. And so the other thing about, Mercury in retrograde, or any planet in retrograde, is it's going to show up differently each time depending on where it is in your natal chart or your progress chart. That can also play into it. So there's many, many different lenses to kind of look at your astrology through. Yes, astrogeography is one, but also just understanding a general way of like how these planets show up is, I think, enough tools to navigate things more gracefully for yourself.
Yeah, I would totally have to agree. Well, is there anything important that somebody should look at in their chart when they're getting a reading?
I feel like it's so individual, so that's why I always kind of preface all of my sessions with like, what's coming up for you? Like, what do you want to focus on? And this can change, like from when we had a session till now, it can totally change. And so I always just like to keep the door open, because there's many different interpretations and ways we can interpret this, or your natal chart, or a progress chart, or any of the astrology that you know want to come to understand. And so yeah, just depending on where you are in life, and each of us is so different, but a big theme that I've been seeing, at least for 2022, for people is like expansion. And expansion is ruled by Jupiter. So if you feel like you want to have that expansive energy and feel really like, you know, your cup is overflowing, that's kind of Jupiter energy. And so it's very abundant, it's very rewarding, it's very joyful, it's a very accepting planet to work with. And I know there's an interesting Jupiter transit that's happening either right now or it's coming up at the end of December. But yeah, so there's definitely Jupiter energy flowing around. And people always want this energy when we're starting a new year, because we want that feeling of like joy, I would say.
Where is my Jupiter line on this chart?
Yours actually hits Colombia and Peru and South America, Chile. So it runs through South America.
Fun. I love Central and South America. Like those are two places that I'm just really drawn to as well. And I hope to spend more time in. And I would love to, like, you know, give back in some way, have a farm down there or something. So that's interesting too. I would also say that last year when I got my chart read, I was in a much different place energetically and emotionally. So since having my chart read last time and then going back and reviewing it with Alyssa today, just seeing how different my mindset and perspective on my actual chart is, but the chart is the same. You know, I was thinking about my life differently, and I still desire to move out of San Diego, but like my feeling of moving out of San Diego then was kind of more of like an escape, where now I definitely feel like I've always felt drawn to leave San Diego, but now it's like more of that heartfelt service that I have like pulling me, instead of just like, I just need to get out of here. So it's so interesting coming back and seeing it again.
So yeah, your chart changes as you change, you know, and that's how I always view it to everyone. Your chart will change as you're changing alongside of it. And so having fresh eyes is always a good thing to go back in and revisit.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all the knowledge on the charts. And again, we are reviewing my chart here that Alyssa did for me last year. And the actual chart itself stays the same, right? The actual chart doesn't change over time.
Yeah. It'll say, this chart will stay the same.
Yeah. So then just the energy, the perspective, the connection into the meaning of what the chart is saying to you, that is what we're saying is changing over time. So it's really cool to come back and review it. But how can people book a astrogeology session with you?
So you can book either on my Instagram, you just go to my link in my bio, or I also run a program called the Astral Academy, which teaches you about all the planetary energies. We go into a lot of astrology, a lot of research, and it's just a place where, like, if you're ready to dive into astrology and you're like, okay, I want to actually learn and then offer this to my clients or, you know, whoever, that's another good place to head to as well. So it's all on my Instagram, and we'll leave the link in the bio below, so you can go ahead and find me, of course.
Yeah. What's your handle though, just so we can hear it?
It's at Alyssa.Donato. So just my name.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us today. And I hope that you all go find Alyssa, because this is some pretty cool stuff. Even if you're just doing your chart for fun, I definitely encourage you to have fun when doing your chart, and then come back and review it at another time, book another session with her, and just kind of like have her go over the meanings of certain things and guiding you further into the next phase or chapter of your life. But again, thank you so much for being here, and until next week, my loves.
Thank you so much for having me.